our webinar here today, Inheriting from a Parent in the Future. This is what you need to know. So if you have parents or grandparents that are going to leave you assets in the future, this is crucial. And we're not exaggerating here. Whether or not you consider yourself high net worth, a multimillionaire or not, the tips and the advice and the issues we're going to give here, it's not official legal advice, but the guidance and education we're going to give you here could save your family hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars when you look across generations. This is what you and really your parents need to know. We're going to talk about the importance of communicating with your parents about their estate plan and what they're going to leave to you and to your children. It's so crucial. This has a huge impact on you, your family, your parents, your grandparents. Let's jump into the topics we're going to cover today, and it's a lot. Yes, if you watch a lot of our webinars, we probably do too much. We may break this into smaller videos on our YouTube channel, but why communicating about your parents' estate plan is crucial. So this is something a lot of people think you just put it on a shelf, you don't talk about it. Wrong. If you can, you need to talk to your parents about this. Another topic, how you should inherit assets from your parents and what can you do about it? It's not as simple as it might sound. Some people think, oh, inherit assets, it is what it is. Wrong. There's a lot of ways that this can be affected and improved if families work together. We're going to talk about the power of dynasty trusts, or as we call them, family protection trusts, why they are so crucial. We're going to talk about estate taxes, something that a lot of people are very justifiably worried about, what you need to know and how to avoid them, and what you can do with your parents to avoid them for their estate and for your own estate. We're going to talk about property taxes and Prop 19. If you are in California, you need to be aware of property tax issues and what your parents need to do to protect the family home or rental for you, your siblings, your grandkids, their grandkids. We also want to talk about capital gains taxes, what you need to know about the stepped up basis. Inheriting assets, it's important to understand that and where your parents' plan might go wrong, what you need to know about that. And we're just going to go through some high-level steps about what to do when a parent passes away. You know, it's such a challenging thing to go through emotionally, legally, in every sense. Just give you some high-level tips, what you need to be aware of at that time. And of course, how you can bring it all together. You know, not much, just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 topics. And I know it's a lot, but we're going to get through it very efficiently. We know this can be hard to talk about, but it truly is extraordinary what we can accomplish when we all work together across generations. And we're going to talk a little bit more about multi-generational planning. Mike and I have spoken at national legal conferences about this, and we've written articles about this, and we think families, whenever possible, should work together. That's what this talk is about, how when families coordinate across generations, they can save hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars for future generations. For those of you who don't know, our firm is going to spend just a moment. We are Gilfix and Lopole Associates. We've been in the Bay Area in California for about 40 years. Have served thousands of families throughout California. If you are in the state of California, we can help you. From San Diego to Wairika, we've been featured in the national media. We love to spread the word and educate. We've written books about these subjects, given talks at conferences, but our main concern is working with our client families to provide extraordinary return on investment and peace of mind. This is not about legalese, it's not about the legal details. It's our job to bring you peace of mind and to protect everything you work so hard for. And it's not just assets, it's your values, it's what you hope for, it's what you dream of. That's what this is about. So on that note,
let's talk about why it's crucial, why it's absolutely imperative. This assumes, of course, there's good communicating relationships between the generations, which is usually the case. Why it is crucial, absolutely essential to communicate with your parents about their estate plan. In a way, it's obvious, but we're going to put some meat on the bones and in a moment talk about some suggestions about how we might do it. And we acknowledge this can be awkward at times. It can be uncomfortable. Nevertheless, I believe that most parents welcome the discussion. We certainly engage in that with our kids. Mark can testify to that. It can make a difference, not just in terms of tax and money, but it makes a huge difference in terms of legacy, quality of care, quality of life, certainty about the future. There's not a need to know everything about what the parents have. It's not a dollar figure issue necessarily. The questions are, is there a plan? Who's responsible? How is it going to fit together? Everybody needs to know that, to have that comfort zone. There are huge tax issues. We're going to go through those in just a couple of minutes. So now let's look at some tips, so to speak, about how you might go about that communication. Clearly, it's got to be positive. Not, oh God, you're getting old and it sucks, we got to deal with it. Yeah, I don't think any of us really want to hear that. More, it's, look, we all have hopes and dreams. So what do we want for the future? What's the family legacy? Always wise when there are grandchildren to use those grandchildren as the tool, as the subject line to kind of leverage your way into this discussion. I mean, who doesn't want to talk about the grandkids? Everybody does. So, really, that's a nice way of saying, gee, mom, dad, we've been thinking about planning. We know you're concerned about our kids. Let's figure out what you've done so we can coordinate. It's incredibly obvious once you think about it. So what are some of the questions that you might ask? Not necessarily using the language you see on the screen, but these are the points. Do you have a plan? When was it updated? If it was done 20, 30 years ago, it's probably out of date. So time, when it was done, is as important to know as whether or not it was done. Can you be helpful? Can I be helpful? Again, you don't want to be intrusive, but supportive. Maybe you're just giving them a referral to an attorney, a financial planner, a CPA, whatever, something like that. So important. Are the right people named? And again, if the child is raising this, yeah, it can be a little bit awkward, but it's really, mom, dad, let's be sure that you're comfortable with your choice of trustee. Who's going to manage things for you? We know it's got to be somebody you're comfortable with. Let's make sure that's covered. Have you thought about tax issues? Property taxes, state, something they have. It might not be a dinner topic, but they think about it. Everybody thinks about it, especially when we talk in a few minutes about losing the family home because of a property tax development. I mean, that goes to the core of our beings, of our values. Preserving the family home for future generations, always important. Protecting assets, mom, I know there's a way that we can be sure that if I get a divorce, if I'm sued, and if everything you leave me, it's going to be safe for the grandkids. How cool is that? Have you thought about that? So again, these are apple pie issues, right? Comfort zone, every point made. So the follow-up point, and sometimes I don't view this as a substitution, but it's important. In some circumstances, you got to be careful about this. There's no question. You don't want to be intrusive. You want to be balanced. If they've done their planning and they just say, look, we've done all of our planning with our attorney. In the unlikely event it wasn't Gilfix and Lepole, who was it? And they just say, look, he's got it. It's all taken care of. You take it to a slightly higher level and say, if you're comfortable, is it okay with you if we just talk with them and just confirm the elements of the plan to see how the tax issues have been addressed, et cetera, just to see if everything is up to date? Again, very positive, and that starts to reinforce this idea of multi-generational planning. Again, the vast majority of parents welcome this kind of discussion. Some won't. I know that. Got to be sensitive to family issues, but it's reality that this is valuable and it's something that you should think about and pursue.
Yeah, and make sure that if they did the plan a long time ago, it probably didn't address property tax issues because there's new laws in California. It probably didn't address updated estate and gift tax rules. So as Mike said, communicate with them and start bringing up those questions. It can, if they worked with another attorney a long time ago, it can be with the same one, but you want to work with an expert. We help many, many families with reviews of their plans that were created a long time ago, whether we help them with that or not. So communicate about it. And you may want to proactively offer to help your parents to connect with an expert attorney in this area. We've helped many families in that area. How can you inherit assets from your parents? Now, I'm going to make a point that may sound crazy. You should not inherit a penny from your parents. You should not inherit a penny from your parents, no matter what they want to leave for future generations. You shouldn't inherit a penny. Why? Mike, why don't you lead us through that? Yeah. There's two general approaches.
So let's deal with this outrageous premise, which is that you should leave nothing to your kids. You should leave nothing to your kids. So what are we getting at? What the heck does this mean? So most folks take the traditional, basic, vanilla approach. They say, when I pass away, the assets go to my kids in equal shares. If they're younger, maybe there's some restrictions. If the grandkids are brought in, age restrictions for distribution. The problems with this, what are the problems with this? Well, number one, if somebody in the family has any special needs issues, leaving money directly to them can be catastrophic. Losing government benefits, wasting the money because of management problems, etc. Are the kids able to manage money? Well, if you leave the money directly to them and they blow it, all the inheritance, what you wanted them to have for security, gone, or at least compromised. Are you concerned about divorce? If they're sued, because if they inherit the money in their own names, that money is exposed. It could be divided equally. If there's a divorce 8 years after you pass away, you'd roll over in your grave if that happened. But that's what it is exposed to. Is there a desire to hold on to California property? Most of us want that for our kids. Well, traditional approach, leave everything to the kids. Serious problems that we'll address in a couple of moments. Concerned about estate tax exposure. If you just leave it directly to the kids, no sophisticated planning. If you're blessed with a larger estate, just accepting the 40% estate tax. So we're opposed to that. We think you should be proactive and do your planning. So how could you inherit? What is the option? The ideal way of leaving assets to your kids is to not leave money to them, but to create trust for their benefit. If you have a child or a grandchild who is disabled, meaning they can't work and make a living, we want to think about special needs trust. But for the vast majority who are able, who can work, who get along fine and can basically manage money, it's a dynasty trust that should be prepared for that child's protection. If there's real estate involved, we have a Dynasty LLC approach. The point there is to protect inherited real property from massive property tax increases. So it's not that dramatically sophisticated, but it certainly is more sophisticated than the simple approach, which frankly doesn't reflect a lot of thinking. It's very surface oriented. So let's get into this for a little bit more and talk about the Dynasty Trust approach and why it's so important. If you leave assets directly to your kids, it's in there, those assets are in their names and those assets are exposed. Now, if instead you leave assets to a dynasty trust, which we in our office call a family protection trust, dynasty trust is the very generic term. You can call it anything. Why do it? Why bother? If you leave assets, number one, if you leave assets to a kid in one of these trusts, those assets are effectively segregated. It's like doing a post-nuptial agreement for your kid. If there's subsequently a divorce, the assets are going to stay with your kid because they're segregated in that trust. If instead they went directly to them, a lot of that money would add up in both names and it would be exposed. Litigation, if the money's in your kid's name and they're sued, that money is exposed. If it's in this trust, a very high level of litigation protection, a barrier is constructed. The big one, tax. If you leave assets directly to your child, those assets become the property of your child and they're in his or her estate. If they grow the assets, we hope they will, at their passing, those assets would be part of their estate and exposed to the estate tax. Well, what if you leave assets in the dynasty trust? Up to extraordinarily high limits, for most of us, everything you leave in the dynasty trust is going to be there for your child to grow and enjoy, but will not be part of your child's taxable estate. Leave him $2 million. He grows it to $7 million. Passes later on, many decades down the road, the $7 million passes intact to the grandkids. The grandkids get the same litigation, divorce, estate tax protection. You can see why it is so powerful. We refer to this as a no-brainer. It's what you should do for your kids.
And I just want to add, yeah. And even if you don't think of yourself as, oh, I'm not wealthy, I'm not high net worth. If you own a house in California, in most parts of California, that justifies creating a family protection trust, because over 2 or 3 generations, that can be many millions of dollars in protections against divorce, lawsuits, and estate tax. I just want to jump in there. Let's go back to the Dynasty LLC.
Let's indeed. Again, the point here is unsophisticated approaches, which is what the vast majority take. They set up their own estate plan. Their lawyer wasn't aware of these issues, or you did your plan years ago, and this new problem about real property tax increases, it's a new development, so you have to deal with it. Your old plan does not take this into account. So the approach that we've developed can save a fortune. It can make the difference between your kid's ability to retain property and losing that property because they can't afford the massive property tax increases. Dynasty trusts, definitely the way to go.
And just to bring this together, we know it can be a challenge to talk to mom and dad about this and to say, hey, have you created a Dynasty, a family protection trust for me? Have you dealt with Prop 19? Again, don't frame it as what can you do for me? I think it's much more about how can we protect what you've worked so hard for. And I know some people don't like working with attorneys. Some people don't want to deal with that. Again, this is about preserving your legacy and really preserving values, because this is a way that you can discuss these high level issues with your kids, your grandkids, or with your parents. If you're the child who's going to inherit in the future, you're the one who has the highest stakes. Mike talked about Prop 19 in California. It doesn't affect your parents. As long as they're around, property taxes stay low. It's when properties go to the next generation where taxes can go up 500%, 1,000%, 10x, 20x, 30x, massive increases. You're the one with this at stake. And if your parents set up protected trusts for you, and if you can help them to do that, you and your kids kids are the ones who really benefit. Property tax planning, I know we hammer this. You have to address this. Even if you just have a single family residence, you still could be affected by this. We have other videos on this. We're going to address this more, but you need to do that planning. As Mike said, it can be the difference between holding on to a property or being forced to sell because you can't afford annual taxes. So talk to your parents about this. If you're going to hear it from your parents in the future, talk to them about this, positively framed. And if they're necessary, if necessary, and they're open to it, we can help you. Make us the bad guys or the good guys, however you want to do it. Get an attorney and say, hey, look, I will pay for that meeting, but I'd like you to just review these issues with Michael Gilfix, Mark Gilfix, or the team, one of the other attorneys at Gilfix and the Poll Associates. Many times we have been in those multi-generational meetings where kids bring their parents in. Sometimes kids just set the meeting for their parents and the kids aren't there, but it's so crucial and there's so much value that you can get if your parents set these structures up and these planning tools for you. So set it up, we can help. Or at least talk to your parents about this and make sure they're addressing this on their own. But again, we can help to make sure all these issues are addressed.
So it is so important to understand the power of these trusts, how critical they are. And, a really good entree, by the way, is to say the truth. You just saw this webinar. Wow, this was new. This was really interesting. Invite your mom or dad to watch it. They probably won't want to, but, maybe they will. But there's your entree to the discussion. They say, what was that about? Why was it so interesting? And there you are. Use us, as Mark said. Use us. Use the webinar as an entree to the discussion. Whatever works, right? Whatever works. We do have a book, Beat Estate Tax Forever, where among many other topics, we talk about dynasty trusts. We talk about all kinds of techniques for addressing estate tax exposure. So again, as you know, we are all over these issues. Be comprehensive, be thoughtful. Let's take care of these challenges and set things up for the next generations.
Yeah, absolutely. And just going back to how you can inherit assets, I just want to reiterate, share this webinar. If you share this video, if you think it's useful, to let your parents know. Subscribe to our Gilfix Law YouTube channel and you can spread those videos. Let the videos do the talking. Even if you don't want to meet directly with an attorney. And family protection trusts are just extraordinary. We have another separate webinar on that. What is a dynasty trust? If you want to check that out more. Estate taxes. What do you need to know and how can you avoid them? And this is really a key issue if you or your parents, it's not just your parents. If you have a larger estate, this is an issue you need to be aware of because this is a multi-generational issue. So what are the numbers where we think you really need to be worried about estate taxes? If you are single, or if one of your parents is no longer around and then one parent's around, or if you're single, if you have a net worth of $5 million or more, you need to be aware of estate tax issues. And if you're a couple, an estate of 10 million or more, you definitely need to be worried about estate taxes. And I know these are big numbers. And many people think, I'm not going to get to 10 million as a couple, or I'm not going to get to 5 million. But keep in mind, your estate is almost certainly larger than you think. It includes the full value of all the real estate you have, all the equity you have, all your investments, all your retirement accounts, future inheritance, depending on how your parents structure things. If they don't structure it properly, whatever you inherit could be exposed to estate taxes in the future. Life insurance proceeds or any death benefits you get or your family gets from your assets. Now, the current exemption, the amount you can pass today without any gift or estate tax exposure it's a large number. It's 12.92 million per person. So for a couple, that's almost $26 million. So you might be thinking, I'm not even close to that. I don't need to worry about that at all. but you still need to be aware of them. And here's why. Mike, why don't you talk about what's coming?
Well, here's the cliff. Here's the cliff. Do not be lulled into complacency because you see that it's $12.92 million per person in terms of estate tax protection. We're going to live past 2026. So in 2026, the law changes dramatically. The level of estate tax protection effectively is cut in half. It'll be about $6.5 million per person. Still very high, no question about it. For a couple, that's like 13 million. And we don't think this law is going to change, by the way. This is what is in the law. No new legislation is going to create this. It would take new tax legislation to get away from it. And there's going to be stagnation in Congress. None of this is going to change. So if you look to the future, what could your estate be given this dramatic decrease in the level of estate tax protection?
Yeah, and so I think it's important to think about where your estate is today and where it will be in 3 years, in 5 years, and 10 years. And if you have real estate or if you're invested in the stock market, I know recently hasn't been so good, but historically, over any 10-year stretch, there has been pretty significant growth in the value of California real estate and pretty significant growth in the value of stocks. I know it varies over time, but just keep in mind, your estate's going to be a lot larger in the future if you have reasonable assets now than it is now. So what do you need to know? Well, if you have a large estate, if you're already over 20 million or 15 million, you already absolutely need to be aware of this and you need to start planning. We have a webinar called Estate Planning, Next Level Estate Planning for High Net Worth Families. It's on the Gilfix Law YouTube channel if you want to really dig into that. Michael Gilfix's book, Beat Estate Tax Forever, is available to our clients. It's available on Amazon. If you want to order it there, Beat Estate Tax Forever, Gilfix, you can look that up. There are many techniques. The point of this talk is not to go into details about these, but there are many techniques can be used to save hundreds of thousands or millions in estate taxes. One simple thing you can do every year, you can give $17,000 a year to as many people as you want, and you don't even have to report it to the IRS. That's the annual gift exemption. If you have grandchildren you want to do this for, you should set up a special trust. Talk to us about that so they don't get all that money when they turn 18. This deadline's coming. If you use all of the exemption before the exemption drops, you can take advantage of the bigger number. If you only give away sort of that $12 million exemption before it drops, it's use it or lose it. So it only does you good if you give away a lot before the exemption drops. So the bottom line is one technique is you give away a bunch of money before the deadline. You maximize what you're allowed to give tax-free and you deal with taxes later. But there are a lot of other techniques we can use. There's spousal lifetime access trust. There's gifting via LLCs or partial share discounting. There are charitable remainder trusts. The point of this is not to go into the details of these, but to let you know there are so many techniques we can use to reduce your estate tax exposure before it gets to the next generation. And it's also so crucial to set up a very powerful family protection trust for your kids. So when they inherit it, it's not part of their taxable estate, which can have huge implications for future generations. So if you have these issues, talk to us, see our other webinar, but really set a meeting with us. You need to be thinking about this ahead of time. Don't wait for that deadline because it's very hard to do things last minute. There's a lot we can do, but the sooner you start, the better. There's another approach to this, by the way.
Now let's consider something that seems a little out of the ordinary. It's this question about whether you should turn down, reject an inheritance or some portion of it. Now, this would not be an issue if a Dynasty trust, family protection trust, was established for your benefit and protection. Because remember, assets that you would inherit in such a trust will not be part of your taxable estate. But if you happen to have a larger estate, if you own a nice home in the area, that alone can create estate tax exposure. So if you accept an inheritance, it's obviously part of your taxable estate, and the significant portion of that could ultimately go to the government in the form of estate taxes. So there is something called a disclaimer, and a disclaimer is a way of saying no thank you to all or any portion of an inheritance. Again, seems counterintuitive, but if you think it through multi-generationally, it makes some sense. If you disclaim an inheritance, the inheritance you would have got passes as if you were deceased. So if your parents' plan is simple and it says it goes to my son, but if he predeceases me, it goes to his 2 kids. If you disclaim, it will go to your 2 kids. A disclaimer has to be exercised in a timely manner. There's forms. It has to be done very carefully, but it works. It can deflect assets so that they don't go into a taxable estate. So it's an option to think about. We view this as one of the most underutilized tax planning techniques on the books. It works routinely. It's on our checklist when we do trust administration work. It's one of the many concepts to be aware of when we're thinking multi-generationally.
And again, we want to frame this as estate taxes. One, your estate's growing. It's probably going to be bigger than you think already because it includes life insurance benefits or death benefits. It includes retirement accounts, it includes equity in real estate. And it's not just your parents, it's your estate too. If you have a large estate, if you've done really well financially, even if your parents have a smaller estate, anything they leave you could be exposed to the 40% estate tax because it's going to be added to what you have. And if you're over the limit, all of that's exposed to taxes before it gets to your kids. So let's say you have a larger estate, your parents don't. It's still crucial for them to set up protective tools to keep that money out of your taxable estate. So we got to think multi-generationally, and it's so crucial for everybody to work together. And we can help you. We routinely do multi-generational meetings with parents and their kids, and sometimes even the grandkids. Mike, you've had 4-generation meetings. I've had many 3-generation meetings. So even if your parents don't have a huge estate, but if you have a growing estate and you're concerned about this, you can help them, push them, encourage them to set up family protection trusts for you. You can even pay for it if they're okay with it. And we have many, it's one of the most incredible investments you can ever make. Many of our high net worth clients have paid for their parents to set up family protection trusts for them. And if you want to learn more about this, if this is a current issue for you, you can look at our webinar, Next Level Estate Planning for High Net Worth Families, and our book, Beat Estate Tax Forever. We got a good question about how can I get a copy of this book. If you're a client of ours, if you're a member of our Peace of Mind program, we'll give you, if you're a member of our client loyalty program, you get a copy. When you meet with us, we'll generally give our clients a copy. It's also available on Amazon. But most importantly, if this is an issue, meet with us. We've helped many families to save hundreds of millions of dollars in unnecessary taxes. We can't guarantee it for everybody, but we've helped so many people and so many families with this issue. So multi-generational issue, talk to your parents about this, get good advice. We can save so much, no matter how much you think you have. There's always these issues to be aware of. Let's talk about property tax issues in California. This is an issue that faces any family that's owned real estate for more than 5 years of any type. Even if you just have one house and that's all you have in the family, it's a great thing to have in California, but especially if you have rental property or a cabin in Tahoe, if you have anything beyond a single family residence, it's even more of an issue because there's a new law, it's not that new anymore, but as of February 15th, I think it was 2021, Prop 19 became law in California, and this largely destroys multi-generational Prop 13 protections. It means there could be a 100% reassessment of property taxes when mom and dad pass away or when they give property to the next generation, meaning property taxes can increase by 1,000%. Yes, that's not a typo. 1,000% or more in many cases. We have some clients where without planning, we're looking at a 25 times increase in property taxes from $1,000 a year to over $28,000 a year or more. So huge, huge increases. There is a partial exception if it's your primary residence. If you're leaving your primary residence to a child and they live in that house, there are some protections, but they're limited. If it's not the primary residence, or if your kids don't live in the house after you pass away, there are zero protections, full reassessment. There are no exceptions in this law if you have a child with special needs. There are no exceptions in this law if you have a child with low income or other problems financially, but we have solutions. So Mike, why don't you explore a little bit more of what this means and how you can deal with it?
So let's look at the two types of property. Basically, we divide them into the residence and everything else. So the first point, if it's a rental property, if it's the vacation home, anything like that, no protections whatsoever, none whatsoever. There will be a complete reassessment if you leave an asset or if you inherit an asset directly from a parent. When there's a change in title, property tax reassessment. Our current record, a case that we're actually fixing, is a situation where mom's property taxes are about $8,000. And if she had left the property directly to her daughter, which she intended to do, property taxes would have gone to over $80,000. It's a big house in Palo Alto. They've owned it forever.
Per year.
per year. So going forward, you're talking literally $1 million plus in extra property taxes that luckily they are going to avoid. So, okay, rental property, vacation home, no protection whatsoever, complete reassessment. So the property taxes are going to reflect the value of the property on the date of your passing, or if your parents passing. For the residents, as Mark indicated, there is a partial level of protection. In some areas, it's complete, where the housing values are smaller. For the primary residence, if it's your residence and if a child makes it his or her residence, then there is a level of protection. The first $1 million in assessed value is essentially forgiven. So let's assume that the property taxes are currently $5,000. The property is worth $3 million, and your child moves in, makes it the residence. So the assessed value is not going to be $3 million, which it would be for a rental property or the vacation home. It's going to be $2 million, right? Because the first $1 million is forgiven. So property taxes are still going to go to about $22,000 or $23,000 a year. There were a number of media reports indicating that if it was the residents, no property tax increase. Those media reports were, number one, wrong, and number two, they did a great deal of damage because a lot of folks relaxed. They thought everything was fine. So the goal of so many folks over the years is to use Prop 13, going way back, Prop 58, keep the family home in the family. Maybe you're not going to make it the residence. Maybe you are, maybe you're not. But it's a great value for renting it out. And the family home, it's like a legacy. It's something that we care about deeply in our society. There's tax breaks, there's protections at every level for the family home. So we don't want to see folks lose the home because they were unaware of this problem. Mark, let's look at some numbers, and you'll be staggered as you look at the reality here.
So yeah, this was I'm an Excel nerd. I used to be a management consultant before I was a lawyer, and I just ran some very simple numbers. Let's say that a home is worth, and this is a single family residence that the family owns, and they want to leave it to the kids, but the kids hope to keep it as a rental, as an asset. Let's say the house is worth $3.3 million, which in many parts of San Diego, LA, the Bay Area is just a pretty nice home. It's kind of crazy how expensive it is. Yes, it blows my mind. But let's say the home is worth $3.3 million and the current assessed value is $300,000. Mom and dad have owned it for a long time. They bought it for, $150,000 25, 30 years ago. So the assessed value is way below the fair market value. When mom and dad pass away, if they don't do any Prop 19 planning and the house is kept as a rental, kids don't live in it, property taxes could go up from $3,300 a year to about $36,000 per year. And keep in mind, Prop 13 then kicks in and taxes can only go up by 2% a year. But 2% increase starting with $36,000 is a much bigger increase than on $3,300. So if they don't do property tax planning, you are looking at over $170,000 in extra property taxes paid in 5 years. You're looking at over $360,000 in extra property taxes over 10 years. And if the kids want to hold on to that house for 30 years, we're looking at almost $1.4 million in extra property taxes if the parents don't plan ahead. Staggering. This is for one property in California. If your parents were lucky enough to buy a house a long time ago and you want to keep it in the family, if you don't do this planning, and you want to keep it as a rental, or you just want to keep that property and you don't plan for this, it could be a $1.34 million problem that you could have solved. And how do you solve it? Well, we can help, but we can only help while mom and dad are still around and if they're willing to do it. We have developed multiple solutions. They're under the umbrella of the Gilfix and LaPaul Dynasty LLC. You have to act now that you can't wait. If we had some people call us, say, hey, my mom just passed away. She left me the house. I just got this huge tax bill. What can I do about it? Not much we can do after the fact. But if you plan ahead, and it sometimes takes many months to do this because it's a complicated process, but we can do it. There are special Dynasty LLC approaches that we can take where we integrate estate tax planning, capital gains tax planning, property tax planning, we talked about family protection trust, with family protection trust for the next generation, where we can work together with the family and over a series of months, it takes some time, totally within the rules, we can keep property taxes low. It's complicated because you have to be aware of capital gains tax. I mentioned before, capital gains taxes, estate taxes, if it's a larger estate, and of course, property tax issues, and there's family dynamics as well. So it's an umbrella name. There's not a one-size-fits-all solution for the Gilfix and the Bold Dynasty LLC. That's an approach that we take. There's a lot of nuance within that, and we know it's a very specialized approach. We don't know many other experts who even understand this issue. So if you face these problems, talk to us, set a meeting with us. We've helped so many families with property tax planning, with Prop 19 planning, and we can still do a lot to keep taxes low, but it takes time and it takes multi-generational coordination. So talk to your parents about this. If they want to leave property that's gone up a lot in value to you, and they want to preserve it for you and for your kids, we need to talk about this. So set a meeting with us, gilfix.com. It's easy to find us. We can help you with this, and do not work with somebody who does not understand this issue in detail, because some people might say, oh, I know how to do it. And we had a lot of clients come to us after they took some very bad steps because they didn't get complete advice. So we understand this issue backwards and forwards. Talk to us. Get your parents to understand you can't just pass property to the next generation and keep taxes low unless you plan ahead, and we can help. So that's the main point here. We have other webinars on the Gilfix Law YouTube channel. Check them out on how to preserve low property taxes, but most importantly, talk to us if this is an issue.
I think, by the way, the best entree to have that discussion with a parent is to say, Mom and Dad, Prop 13 was so important to you. Prop 13 rings a bell with everybody, especially if you're older. And but it's been eviscerated. It's been destroyed for the next generation. So that would get attention. I promise you that will get attention and make it very easy to raise the discussion point. Okay, so now let's take a couple.
Talk to your family about this.
Talk to your family. Let's focus on capital gains tax, an issue that is at the heart and core of inheriting assets. And what does it mean? Why do we think about capital gains tax? Capital gains tax is a tax on profit when you sell an asset. You buy a share of stock for $10. That's the cost basis. You sell it later for $20, you have a $10 profit or capital gain, and you have to pay capital gains tax on that. If you held it over a year, typically you do. It's roughly a 30% tax, combined state and federal tax. It's a tax that has to be paid the following year along with your income tax return. So knowing what the basis is for an asset is critically important, and being sure that we get a stepped up basis if we possibly can. All of the assets that are in your estate, as we'll see in a moment, all of the assets that are in your taxable estate receive this thing called a stepped up basis. And it's very simple what that means. At your passing, you put a value on the assets. If it's a share of stock, that's very obvious. If it's a piece of property, it has to be appraised. The market value on the date of death becomes the new basis. If the property is then sold, no capital gains tax. So you bought a house for $100,000. Now it's worth $2 million. If you sell it while you're living, capital gains tax exposure. At your passing, the basis goes up to $2 million. If your surviving spouse or a kid sells it for $2 million, subtract the new basis at $2 million, zero gain, zero tax. So understanding how this works is critically important to be sure in most cases that assets are in the estate. I'll add a complicating point that may be a little bit much, but when we're doing planning in this context of Proposition 19 and real property, it's a real question about whether assets should or should not be retained in your estate for stepped up basis purposes. That's a little bit of a confusing point. It makes the point, however, that we have to integrate our thinking about property tax and capital gains tax and estate tax. Have to be thinking about all three whenever you do this kind of proactive tax planning. So real property, stock, any assets that you have, they enjoy the stepped up basis. Understanding it and doing the work properly after someone passes away to document it is critical. Has to be done professionally and accurately to be sure that you can rely on the new appraised values.
Yeah, and just to tie this all together, if you're going to inherit from your parents, what do you need to do about about capital gains taxes? As Mike said, there is a stepped up basis when someone passes away and assets are in their estate. Now you do have to literally die for this. So it's a nice benefit to the family, but someone has to pass away to get it. But it's crucial to understand that. And what are the implications for you if you're going to inherit from your parents? Well, If they have the wrong living trust structure, and this is a totally different discussion. We actually have a webinar on is my trust. I forget what it's even called. Check out the Gilfix Law YouTube channel. But do they have the right trust structure? If they set it up a long time ago, they might have an A-B trust structure. That might not be the right structure anymore. Maybe it still is. But if you have the wrong living trust structure, you might be unnecessarily exposing your kids and grandkids to hundreds of thousands of dollars in capital gains tax exposure. Again, even if you're not a multimillionaire, because capital gains taxes, everybody faces those. If the value of something goes up, no matter how much money you have to pay capital gains taxes on those. So you need to revisit the structure of your trust. And if it's your parents that you're concerned about, again, connect them with an attorney. We can help. Gilfix.com, easy to find us. We've helped many adult children. They'll say, hey, can I set a meeting for my parents? My parents are open to it. They don't want to deal with it, but I'm going to pay for it, or I'm going to set it up. As long as they're okay with that, we can set a meeting with your parents, or if you're the parent, we can set a meeting with you to take a look. We talked about the importance in other videos and here about setting up protective dynasty trust, family protection trust, property tax planning. But even if these are not issues for you, you need to be aware of capital gains taxes, and the wrong living trust structure could unnecessarily expose your family, again, to hundreds of thousands of dollars in capital gains tax exposure. I know it's a lot, but there are so many different ways that we can help you to deal with this and to eliminate unnecessary taxes. So there's implications for all of this. And we can of course help, but I think talk to an expert. Make sure that based on the size of your parents' estate or the size of your estate, you have the right living trust structure. So crucial. Otherwise, you could be unnecessarily exposed to huge capital gains taxes when assets go to the next generation. When a parent passes away, we've talked about what you can do if you expect to inherit assets in the future. We have a lot of resources about that, but what a devastating thing to lose a parent. I've worked with people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, all age groups. I guess people in their 90s probably aren't losing parents at that point. But no matter what age you are, losing a parent is devastating. I mean, it's so challenging. And of course, when you lose a parent, family comes first. Deal with the emotional thing, coming together, celebrating your parent's life. But we want to go through some do's and do nots from a legal perspective, because you have to be aware of that. If you're going to inherit assets from your parents, there's going to be steps around the administration of their estate. So one thing, when you lose a parent, focus on family. Don't start taking legal steps on your own. Don't start trying to wrap things up right away because you just want to get it over with. So many mistakes can happen. There's a lot of steps you can't even take right away. You have to wait a period of time before you can even start the administration process. There are legal reasons for this. Don't immediately contact banks and financial institutions until you get expert advice. Now, what are some things that you should do? Mike, why don't you go through some of the things you should do after you lose a loved one?
Sure. It's a matter of being proactive. And this is particularly important for the child, typically the child who is the trustee, the successor trustee. The vast majority will have revocable living trusts. The assets are in the trust other than retirement accounts, or they should be. So the person who is the trustee is the responsible individual, not all three kids, maybe none of the kids. The person who is named as the successor trustee is the one who has full responsibility and exclusive responsibility for managing this process of settling the estate. God forbid there was only a will and the estate has to go through probate. Our clients never go through probate, where costs are dramatically higher, dehumanizing. You never want to be there. Okay, so what do you do? Well, you preserve records. That's sort of obvious, but record keeping is really important. And if you don't, it can be reconstructed. Mark's point made earlier is really the most important thing. It's a time to think about family and being together and supporting one another. That's the most, by any measure, that's the most important thing. But when it comes to financial things, administering the trust, contact your attorney, the attorney who understands how to do this. And again, not every attorney knows how to handle trust administration processes with sophistication. In our office, our tax attorney, Mr. LaPole, he handles 100% of the trust administrations. Going to the last point you see in the slide, it is remarkable what can be done even after someone passes away to capture tax benefits, to get reductions in the value of assets, this discounting concept. How to deal with Prop 19. Sometimes there are some advantages we can capture. Can't miss deadlines, have to send out notices that are properly constructed. It is not a simple process. It's a multi-stage process. It's almost embarrassing to say how long our checklist is when we manage the trust administration process. I mean, it's over 35 steps that have to be taken that we document carefully. So take care of the family, be sophisticated, be smart, don't make any mistakes. Just get advice before anything is finalized so that we can make sure that everybody is protected.
Yeah, and just a couple points I'll add too is one that you actually, this is more of it, but you need to get a lot of copies of death certificates as well. When someone is lost, when you're going to get them, get a lot of copies. You're going to end up needing them. You don't need that appointment with the attorney to be right away. Many of our meetings, when a parent passes away, when we're helping adult children through the process, sometimes they won't meet with us for a month, 2 months, or even sometimes a little bit longer. As long as you're saving records, we still can make sure we hit all the deadlines. But make sure you're working with an expert who specializes in trust administration. And we have helped, again, hundreds of families with this, if not more, over the years. And expert help will more than pay for itself. It doesn't always seem that way. Sometimes people want to corner and they don't think they need an attorney. You won't see it right away, but it will, in many cases, end up costing your family tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars down the road in ways you don't even know. You don't know what you don't know. Get experts to help. So deal with family, and we can, of course, help. So are you going to inherit assets from your parents in the future? What are 3 key steps to bring this all together? I think 1, talk to your parents. Communication, multi-generational communication. Talk to them about their estate, their assets, and if they have an estate plan. You don't need to get exact dollar amounts, and it should be framed positively. It should not be, hey, what am I going to get? I want you to protect stuff for me. It should be more about, what are your wishes, your hopes, your dreams? How can we preserve everything you worked so hard for? How can we protect those perfect grandkids? Because especially until they reach, 25, 30, they're almost all perfect. We've experienced that, right, Dad? So avoid, talk about these things. Don't leave them in the closet. Don't just think, oh, mom and dad created a plan 20 years ago. Let's not talk about it. Communicate about it. And 2, encourage them to get an expert review. If you are concerned about property taxes in California, you need to be concerned about property tax increases when you inherit assets. If you're concerned about your inheritance being protected from divorce or lawsuits or future estate taxes, or if you're just concerned about the general structure, do they have something that's up to date? Encourage them to meet with their existing attorney if they've had someone they work with for a long time, they're really good at this and understand all these issues. Maybe they go back to them, or we've helped many, many people who've either, if you've worked with us in the past at Gilfix.com, of course, we welcome the chance to help people review things, but we can do second opinions. If you're just not sure, you can set a meeting with us and we can help them to review all these issues, make sure that their estate plan is up to date, making sure that it addresses property tax planning, asset protection for you, capital gains tax issues, estate taxes. There's special needs planning issues. There's so many issues. And we bring that all together. And if they're okay with it, you can set that meeting where you can attend with them. We've had many multi-generational meetings. We've written articles about the power of multi-generational communication and planning. We've given talks at legal conferences to encourage other attorneys to bring families together when possible. We know it's not always possible. But you can come to the meeting with them, or you can just facilitate the meeting for them. You can set it up and say, Mom and Dad, I'm not going to be involved, but I'm going to help you do this. I want to make sure things are right, and leave it up to them. So talk to your parents about this, communicate, encourage them to get an expert review if you're concerned about any of these issues. And you might even go beyond that and actually set a meeting for them, or encourage them to do it, or just make sure that something is done to take a fresh look at what they have as part of their estate plan, and if they're addressing these issues. And if they're not, maybe you offer to pay for it because you're the one who's going to benefit from it. You got to make sure they're okay with that. But you and your kids are really going to benefit if they do the right planning. And we don't want you to lose this opportunity. When you have these issues in mind, when you're worried about them, you should take action now, because the moment you stop watching this, the moment you stop thinking about this, life piles up and you're going to start forgetting it. You're going to put it off. It's almost like going to the dentist. I hate to say it. I don't want to compare. I love dentists, but I don't want to compare what we do to being a dentist. But I know sometimes it feels a little painful to meet with attorneys. But the reality is, what we can do can deliver so much value. We can help you to review your existing plan or your parents' existing plan. We can develop a step-by-step process to protect assets and to update the plan. And we can ensure that everything you've worked so hard for your entire life, or your parents have worked so hard for, is protected. Because nobody wants to feel like, I worked my entire life to save up to get this house or to save up these assets. That's fine if a bunch of it goes to the state of California tax collector. I don't care. very few people feel that way, right? You want to keep it for your family if you can. And we just want to emphasize, if you are high net worth, you definitely need to address these. But even if you don't consider yourself to be high net worth or wealthy, these are still issues that could mean the difference of hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars over multiple generations. So if you're expecting to inherit, communicate, set those meetings. Let's be proactive about this. And of course, we would welcome you to join our client community. If you're not already a client, if you are, set a meeting with us. You can find us easily at gilfix.com. Our calendars do get busy at times and availability can be limited, especially when deadlines are approaching. But we always will find time. If you give us a little bit of time to plan ahead, we can set a meeting with you. And all these issues we talk about in all our videos, our webinars, our seminars, our talks, our articles, we make sure once we get to know you in your situation, we will bring it down to just what matters to you. So you don't need to know all of this. We want to empower you. We want to educate you. We want you to understand these issues, but you don't need to know the details. That's our job. Get that expert help. So it'll deliver extraordinary peace of mind. Easy to find us, 650-493-8070. We have another number online that also works, gilfix.com. If you'd like us to reach out to you and you're watching this live, you can enter your information in the Q&A function and we'll get back to you. We're going to get to some questions in just a moment. We had some really good ones, but we hope you got a lot out of this. We thank you so much for spending this time. Wow, we did this under an hour. We covered so much here. We probably did too much, but we're going to break this up into probably smaller videos as well. So look at the Gilfix Law YouTube channel. I am Mark Gilfix. This is Michael Gilfix, and we thank you so much for joining us. We're going to get to just a couple questions right here. But wow, oh my gosh, my head is spinning. Dad, how do you feel?
Yeah, these young guys, I mean, their head spins. They can't keep track of these issues like we can. So I'm sympathetic. I'm supportive. But look, on the very serious side, multi-generational planning, we live it, we breathe it. We do it together, and other attorneys. We have 7 attorneys here, so it isn't just the 2 of us.
Yeah.
So let's encourage folks to be in touch, and let's look at a couple of questions. I'll look at the first really good one. Charles asks about Prop 19. He says, since it's relatively new, is our approach, this Dynasty LLC strategy, has it been challenged and tested? Well, no. Number one, what we have done is new, but we've handled a number of cases through to conclusion, and there's been no problems. The next part has to be very overarching and vague. Before Prop 19 came into law, there were no protections for passing property along to a niece or a nephew. All the protections were for passing property to a child. So we use similar techniques and tools to protect property taxes in those contexts. So we have comparable experience. Our tax attorney is also a realtor, Mr. LaPole, understands these issues inside out. So, and by the way, the alternative is to do nothing, and then there's going to be a property tax increase, right? So think about that. You take the best alternative available and you use it.
Yeah, and as we say, hope is not a strategy. Hoping that things change in the future, that's not a strategy. So you have to take some action. And I can say we've been contacted by attorneys and experts throughout the state of California to ask us what we're doing on this. We know that and as Mike said, we've had to use sophisticated techniques in many cases for many years, even before Prop 19 was law. We've been able to adapt those for the Prop 19 situation. So we hit the ground running with this. I think that's why we were one of, if not the first firm in the state to really develop solutions and really communicate them with the public. You want to talk to the question from Kent Hansen?
Yeah, I'll do Kent. Kent, good question. Hey, Kent. If parents have an AB trust and one dies before a Dynasty trust is put into place, have we lost 50% of the value? Maybe, maybe not. There are actually tools we can utilize to empty what is called the exemption or the bypass trust. Not always wise, sometimes it is, and that lets the survivor have complete control of all of the assets, and then all of the assets can go into a Dynasty trust. We have to be very careful to analyze the potential estate tax implications of this. Doesn't always make sense, but is it possible? Absolutely, yes. But even capturing 50% protection of the estate with the Dynasty, even that makes it worthwhile.
Why don't we a good question from RC? If people do a Dynasty trust in California, does it apply to other states if their children are in other states? What do I do if they move? What if my kids are not in California? Mike, do you want to take that?
The Dynasty Trust is fundamentally federal when it comes to the most important protection, which is estate tax avoidance. So that's going to travel to any state in the country. Some of the language that we utilize in the trust to maximize litigation protection is California law sensitive. We believe it's going to be helpful and productive in any state in the country. But if I was in Louisiana, we probably would have drafted the discretionary language, which is critical to litigation protection. That might have been drafted somewhat differently, but again, for the divorce protection and the estate tax protections, we think they're going to be fine wherever you may be.
Yeah, laws can change over time, and we can't make any guarantees, but we can say it's a lot better than not doing the Dynasty Trust, no matter where your child lives. And you don't know where your kid's going to move. They can move 3 times over time, so you do the best you can, and it's a lot more straightforward and efficient if we set them up here. There are all kinds of tools out there, but you don't want to overthink and overcomplicate things. We have a good question about, is the Dynasty Trust the same, from Roseanne, a Dynasty Trust the same as the Dynasty LLC process? We talked about Dynasty Trusts, as we call them, Family Protection Trust. Is that the same as the Dynasty LLC that we're using for property tax planning? And no, I know the names are similar. We're trying to play around with the names of these, but no, they are not the same. Whether or not you own property, whether if you just have cash in the bank, you want to leave that in a protected way to your kids, you want to create that family protection trust, aka Dynasty Trust for your kids, has nothing to do with property tax planning. Property tax planning, we are using the blanket term, the Dynasty LLC approach, because we want to layer in the dynastic protections, some divorce protections, some lawsuits, some estate tax with we use some entities in this planning to keep property taxes low, but it's not all one size, it's not a one size fits all solution. So that's a different process where we usually integrate family protection trusts into it, but it requires many additional steps and it's much more complicated, frankly, and a bit more challenging, but we can do it. But we do integrate the 2 types of planning when we're doing property tax planning. But a Dynasty Trust, whether or not you have property tax issues, no brainer to do that. We want to do maybe one more question.
Yeah, from Rich. It's a really good question. They're all good questions. We said that capital gains could be an issue and it needs to be balanced with the state taxes. And then the observation is offered, aren't appreciated stocks stepped up so they can be sold after someone passes away and there's no capital gains tax? Yes, that's right. The point is this, that in some circumstances, it makes sense to remove assets from the taxable estate to avoid estate tax. Now, if they're not in the estate when you pass away, there's no stepped up basis, but it's a trade-off. If we can avoid the 40% estate tax and maybe someday have some exposure to the 30% capital gains tax, that's a good trade-off. Remember, capital gains are taxes of choice. If an asset is not sold, there are no capital gains taxes. So again, it's a matter of strategy and integrating all of the thinking that we have to do on behalf of a particular client in a particular circumstance.
Yeah, wow. I still, like, over 90% of people are still with us. It's amazing. So it's been like almost over an hour. We've answered a lot of questions. So clearly we're hitting some nerves. So I'm so glad that this resonated and we're answering a lot of questions people have. So I think we're going to wrap it up. We have to get back to client meetings and things like that. But we really hope you got a lot out of this and you are now empowered with this knowledge and information. Spread the word. If it's you and you need to bring this up with your family, take action now. Set that meeting with us if we can be helpful, or at least bring this up with your family. No matter what, start the conversation. Don't let this just drift. If everybody is educated and informed, you'll make a good decision of whether or not to do this. But if you're not informed, you can't make a decision about what you need to do. So we would love to get the opportunity to help you and your family. Gilfix.com. Subscribe to our Gilfix Law YouTube channel. We will have this on, it's already on our Gilfix Law YouTube channel if you're watching it there. Spread the word, share the video. We're going to try to break this up into shorter videos as well. But so we just hope you got a lot out of this. We love educating and reaching out to the community. That's why we put so much work in spreading the word about this. But again, this is about you. This is not about us. I hope you guys got a lot out of this. And I hope everybody's staying safe, sane, and healthy, as my mom likes to say. Mike, any closing thoughts?
No, that's by the way, there's more questions. Sorry, we didn't have time for all of them. The data are that like 80% of folks usually drop off of webinars after like 8 minutes. So we're doing something right. And that means we're delivering value. And we are very proud of that. We work very hard at that. And thank you for attending and staying with us.
Yeah. So, all right, everybody, call us if you want to explore these issues in more detail. We'd be happy to meet with you and your family. Again, hope everybody is doing really well. And we have another webinar coming up soon on a celebrity estate planning adventures and mistakes. We're going to tell some stories. Check out our YouTube channel. Stay well. Call us if we can help. Take care.
Take care.